Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Grace Hour, our program that takes a dive into the believer's daily challenges and helps them to learn their faith in a practical way. My name is Pastor Matt Garrett, and I am joined once again 2 days in a row.
2 days in a row.
2 days in a row.
Yes.
By Philippe Siraji, Director of the Young Adults Ministry at Greater Grace World Outreach. Just a legend of a man in and of himself. And today... we are going to today we are going to continue the topic on Christian ethics, and specifically we're going to tackle a question that is involved in much more than Christian ethics, but it's a main component of Christian ethics. And that question is, who defines what is right and what is wrong?
Yep.
So I'm just going to kick it right over to Philippe. We're going to give you one of those quick, short answers and say we're done with the show. But then we're actually going to talk about it a little bit. So, Philippe,
well, the quick answer is God does.
God does.
It was good to talk to you today.
It was great.
See you next week.
Thanks for being here. That's what happens when they give us 2 episodes in a row. All right, we talked enough yesterday. Yeah. This is all we got. Yeah. God,
I want to go home.
See you later. Okay.
More seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah. So before we do, we have a lot to say on the topic, and I think you have to maybe bear with us. It might be a little more technical than usual in one way because we have a lot of points to make, and then but before we do, I think we asked a question in one way today, like who defines what is right, what is wrong? And there was a time where this question was not even raised, which was in the Garden of Eden.
Yes.
Right? So Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden. They knew everything they knew by revelation from God. Right? The Bible says they met every day. We don't know if it's morning or evening, but they met once a day. And God instructed Adam and Eve on everything, so he created them, created the garden, and he said, this is the life you can have. This is what you need to do. You can, you can dominate the earth. You can multiply.
Yeah.
Then you can eat all these trees. This is the trees you can eat of. This is the tree of life. And there's one tree you cannot eat of, which is a true tree of knowledge of good and evil. And I think this is the very important thing here is when I ask the students when I do the class, ethics, which I'm teaching tonight, is do you know, what do you think, did Adam and Eve know about good and evil before the fall? And 99% of the time, students are going to say, no, they didn't, because they ate of the tree. That's how they knew good and evil. And you see that also in secular philosophy, where they say, well, they are happy that Adam and Eve ate of the tree because now we acquire knowledge.
Yeah.
But what is not the case at all, it's not the case at all. Like Adam and Eve had a knowledge of good and evil before.
Yeah.
They ate of the tree because they were instructed by God and they knew there was a line somewhere. Like obedience and disobedience was a knowledge. Right and wrong was a knowledge. They knew it was right to eat of the trees and it was not right. It was wrong to eat of this tree.
Right.
So the difference between before and after the eating of the tree is not that they were clueless and they became aware of the right and wrong. Is they got their right and wrong from God, and then eating the tree, they got their right and wrong autonomously from God.
Yeah.
Now I can disagree with God.
Yes.
And that's the situation we're in now, where people decide, well, God says this, but I'm not going to do it anyway. So hence the question today, who defines what is right and what is wrong? Because now we have this situation where we're autonomous from God.
Yeah. So basically to summarize that, and just to say it maybe just a little simpler, is to say that the source of our understanding. No, it wasn't. I just, just
you
to
can
repeat.
see without the French accent, maybe that would help.
I'll do my best. Sometimes I just break into a French accent without even trying.
No,
it's usually when I start to clear my throat, I get all guttural. See there. Oh, here it comes. Okay. No, just kidding. So an easier way to say that is that the source of our understanding of what good and what evil was God.
Yes.
And then the source changed.
Yes.
And when the source changed, we had a totally different understanding of what good and evil was. And really, it just kind of kept God out of it whenever we had that understanding. That's that word autonomy.
Yes.
It's like we are self-sufficient.
Yes.
We learn ourselves. We teach ourselves. We grow ourselves. It's kind of like, the American dream in a way. Like you go through school all your life and you grow, you gain knowledge, and then you specialize in something, and that's what your career ends up being, and you take off into the world, and it's all about like your own self-propelled course, right? But all of this is to say, like, God has nothing to do with it. So in Genesis 3, so Genesis 2, God has everything to do with it. And then Genesis 3, this character comes in. His name is the serpent in Genesis 3. He's more subtle than any creature. And he says, well, did God really say this? And then we're on our road to autonomy right from there.
Yeah, and I think he also where he questions God, in his word, and he questions God in his character, right? So that's when I think this is when you talk to atheists and people, they say, well, the Judeo-Christian morals is oppressive, right? You cannot be this, you cannot do that. In their mind, I think it's echoing from what the devil said in the beginning, right? Because he says, did God really say? And then when actually he starts to see doubt in Eve in particular, then he will say, well, God knows something that, he doesn't want you will be like gods.
Yeah.
And that's exactly in an ethical term, in a moral terms, it's true.
Yeah.
Like you can decide for yourself. So you are God under God's authority, and he's going to question his word. Did he really say that? I don't know. And then do you know why he actually said that? If he did, he knows that if you do eat of that tree, you will compete with him.
Yeah.
He's God, you will be God as well. And in a way, when you look at the idea of ethics, this is true. You had one source of knowledge before, and then you can be your own source of knowledge. And then we'll talk later on about, like commitments that people have in their philosophy. I think there's other things that we see in the world that are actually, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday, like people will make decisions, ethical or moral decisions, based on their preferences.
Yes.
And that's why we are reaping the consequences in our society. We want happiness, therefore we'll do anything we want. I don't have money, I'm going to rob the money because it's that's the idea. So the Bible calls this sin, and we call this pleasure, or we call this happiness.
Yeah.
And that's one of the big differences as well.
Yeah, I think it's in Romans chapter 1. We referenced it a little bit yesterday, where they know the truth and they suppress it.
Yes.
But even more so, it says, God gave them up to uncleanness through the lusts of their own hearts,
Yes.
to dishonor their own bodies between themselves, who changed the truth of God into a lie, and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. So you had the devil come in Genesis 3 and put these little like doubts in Eve's mind, and then it infected Eve, it infected Adam, and then it infects the entire human race. And ultimately we get to the world today and what Paul is talking about to the letter in his letter to the Romans. And you have everyone, instead of worshiping the Creator who made them, they'd rather worship any other creature.
Yes.
Because they feel like they're on a level playing field with those things.
Yes.
There's this was Satan's MO in Isaiah 14. I will be like the Most High God. He was a created being from God, and he could never attain to creator status. So in our autonomy, in our wanting to decide what's right and wrong, we are somehow trying to like take a jab at God and say, "Oh, I can do this. Yeah, if I had those powers, I could do it, and this is the way I would do it."
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's just interesting to see that, like, really we just start to worship all of the creation rather than the one who put us here to begin with.
Yeah.
And this happens most often, it starts happening most often by, us taking our decisions into our own hands and not including God in those things.
Yeah, I think it puts us in an interesting position as human beings, because now we want to be autonomous from God, as we said, and we have a fallen nature, so we have temptations, we have sins, we have this, these lusts that are, plaguing us in one way. And then when we look at this, as I said earlier, like atheists, we look at our morals as being oppressive. And it is oppressive to the flesh in one way, but it's not oppressive to us as human beings. And we find ourselves in an untenable situation where we want to reject God. So we reject objectivity in ethics, meaning that there is no absolute morals. And in the same times, we because we don't want to be oppressed by the Bible, the commandments, the Judeo-Christian, civilization, as people would put it this way. But in the same times, we make our own decisions. Then we impose our sinful decisions on others by saying you shouldn't. So that's interesting how this, and we'll talk about the need for objectivity in ethics in a moment. But what I find interesting here, and that's also a very good argument when we talk to people, is that on one way, you are rejecting the idea of objectivity in ethics. There is no God, there is no absolute ethics. You want to do things on your own, but when you want to do something on your own and we don't agree with you, you blame us for being wrong about it.
Yes.
And that's one thing that is also very interesting. If there's no objective truth and there's no objective morals, then there shouldn't be any in any case. Anybody should be able to do whatever they want for their own sake. But we can't accept that either.
Right.
So hence the question, how do we define what is right and what is wrong?
Right. Society just can't function that way.
No,
However, we strive to make it happen somehow. We have this really great quote here by Francis Schaeffer.
Yes.
And he says, if there is no absolute moral standard, then one cannot say in a final sense that anything is right or wrong.
Yes.
By absolute, we mean that which always applies, that which provides a final or ultimate standard. There must be an absolute if there are to be morals. And if there must be an absolute if there are to be real... And there must be an absolute if there are to be real values.
Yes.
If there is no absolute beyond man's ideas, then there is no final appeal to judge between individuals and groups whose moral judgments conflict. We are merely left with conflicting opinions.
Yes.
Yeah. So like you think about from a biblical sense, the book of Judges, the entire premise of the book of Judges is going away from God and then calling on God and coming back to him.
Yes.
And every time they go away from God, God makes a statement in the book of Judges. He says, and they all did what was right in their own eyes.
Yeah.
And every single time you read it, it's like 5 or 6 times in the book of Judges. Every single time you read it, the nation just takes a tailspin downwards.
Yes.
Just goes deep into idolatry and famine and peril and like losing battles. Just so many things go wrong for them. Yeah. And then every time they come back to God and they call on him, he provides something for them. And it's like we have this provision from God at any point in our lives that if we call out to him, he will answer.
Yeah.
But we so often tend the other way. We so often tend to, I'm just going to do what I think is right.
Yes. Yeah, and what I like about this here is that he's putting in plainly in one way, right? Again, what is our question today? Who defines what is right and what is wrong? You have only 2 options, right? This is another quote that we have on our paper here by Max Ockett, which is, he's not a Christian, but he says something very interesting and plain. He says the fundamental questions of ethics is this one. Who makes the rule?
Yeah.
God or man? There's only 2 options, right? The theistic answer, which is what we believe, is that God makes them, right? The humanistic answer, which is there is no God in that way, answers is that man makes them. The distinction between theism and humanism is the fundamental division in moral theory, meaning is that we don't agree at all where authority comes from. But deeper than that, as Schaeffer was saying, is that it's not just like, okay, we believe in God, therefore we take it from them, or we don't believe in God, therefore we take our own rules. The point is, if we take it among ourselves, then there's absolutely no objectivity and absolute authority or absolute truth in that way. So as Christians, it's way simpler to think this way. Like, what is morally wrong is morally wrong. I can call it differently if I want. I would have to rationalize to make it wrong. But there is an absolute idea. And we find ourselves, as I said, in this untenable situation in society, where I think we spoke about the Qatar World Cup yesterday, just as a quick example.
Right.
Like, we look at this, like, in our world, we are pro, everybody should live the way they want. There is no lifestyle that is out of, every lifestyle is acceptable. Then we look at places where there is a Muslim form of ethics. Like we go to Qatar and we want to make a statement. But the point is, this is what it's amazing about it, is like you're saying that there is no absolute truth morals except yours.
Except yours.
Except yours.
Except everyone who doesn't agree with us is a bigot or is hateful in some way, committing hate crimes in their words or thoughts or actions. I don't even know. Yeah, it can get a little carried away.
Yeah, it can. In this way, what's interesting is that we're saying that there is a need for absolute morals, and we know that deep in ourselves.
Yeah.
And when I look at this, I don't agree with you, and that's as Schaeffer said, we're left with conflicting opinions. But we cannot live this way. Yeah. Because if there is no God, like most people would say, when they're atheistics, well, there is no God, therefore everybody live according to what they want. Well, leave Qatar alone.
Yeah. Leave
Muslim country alone.
Right.
Yes, they oppress the lesbians and gay. Oh, that's their choice.
Right.
So on what objective ground are you saying that there is they should be condemned? Or on what objective grounds are looking back in history and saying that Hitler was a monster?
Right.
Well, that was his preference. He didn't like some people, just got rid of them.
Yeah.
So and we're appalled by the idea.
Right.
It's because we're made in God's image. So whether you're a Christian or you're not a Christian, you know there's a need for objectivity in ethics.
Yeah.
Except you want to reject it.
Yes.
And that's so interesting to me.
Yeah, suppressing the truth.
We're
It's
suppressing.
just this crazy idea in James chapter 3, half brother of Christ. He puts it like this. He says that there's two types of wisdom in the
Yes.
world. He says there's wisdom from above, and we could equate this maybe to the tree of life in Genesis chapters 2 and 3. And then there's wisdom from below. And we could equate that to like the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And this is what he says about wisdom from below. James chapter 3 and verse 15. This wisdom descends not from above, but is earthly, sensual, and devilish.
Yes.
And the first time I believe that we see this actually take place, like this own man is going to decide his own ethical standards. I think we see it with Cain in Genesis
Yes.
chapter 4.
Yes.
I think it's the first place. God curses the ground as punishment for Adam and Eve's discretion. Okay, he curses the ground. And what does Cain do? Cain brings an offering to God from the ground,
Yes.
from the fruit of the ground. So he brings a cursed offering to God and says, well, this is what I do. This is how I work with my hands. This is what I'm able to provide.
Yeah.
God, you need to accept this.
Yes.
And God doesn't accept it.
Well, God cannot accept vegetables. We know that.
Spoken like a true meat eater, God cannot accept vegetables. Absolutely. No, but he does this of his own free will. He says that this is what God's going to accept.
Yes.
And this is what we do when we start to make our own rules. So there's the earthly part of the
Yes.
wisdom from below.
Yes.
It's from the ground. It's
Yes.
from what man can do.
Yes.
And then it says that wisdom becomes sensual.
Sensual, yeah.
It becomes filled with your emotions and your senses. And what happens to Cain immediately after he's rejected? Do you know
What happens?
What happens to Cain
He gets
immediately?
mad.
He gets mad. He gets angry. He gets
Yes.
full of this emotion, and he like lashes out not only against God, but eventually against his brother. And then this
Yeah.
is where the devilish aspect of wisdom from below comes in. This is the first murder that takes place in the Bible. Cain is so angry, so wroth, he slays his brother.
Yeah.
And so that's the wisdom from below. That's
Yes.
man choosing, I'm going to decide what's right and what's wrong.
Yeah.
God has a system of values. God has, the way we understand it, he has a set of morals that we could follow, right?
Yeah.
But when we choose to make it our own thing, we descend into the earthly, the sensual, and the devilish.
Yes.
And we're left with a catastrophic consequence. Our brother is dead. We are banned from a life, like Cain is banned, like he's sent off, he's put a mark on his arm, he builds cities for the rest of his life, and that's like his lot in life.
Yes.
So I think that's interesting. You compare that with wisdom from above.
Yes.
Wisdom from above is pure. Like when God met Adam in the garden, hey,
Yeah.
I'm going to bring you all the animals, you name them. That relationship is pure. That relationship is a lot of freedom for Adam. You're going to go to sleep and I'm going to take a rib out of you and I'm going to give you a wife because there has been no help meet found for you here in the garden. And God just like adds to his life. It's first pure, then it's peaceable. What else does it say? The wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, easy to be entreated, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy.
Yeah.
It's just God's way of doing things is different.
Yes. And I think it brings up the idea, we'll go back to Genesis 3, where the devil questions what God says, and then he questions his character by saying, well, he knows something he didn't want you to know. He's afraid of something, you know. And I think it's the same thing with ethics. I think sometimes people look at what we believe as Christians and look at this as being oppressive, as I said. Well, you're taking away my freedom, you know. So we can talk about that in a moment. But what I like about this, I think before we go into maybe other ways of defining ethics, is the idea that God has, basically, let's put it this way, what was God's motivation to give the law? What was God's motivation to reveal himself?
Yeah.
What was God's motivation to tell Adam and Eve, do not eat of that tree? And when you look at the commandments in Exodus 20, for example, you can look at this and wonder, okay, is there this? I can see this as a list of restrictions, and it's oppressive. You know, cannot do this, cannot do this, cannot do this, or you know, or I can see this as a protection. You know,
Right.
God cares about me and living with others in society. When He says, Because I can look at things, that shall not steal. Well,
Yeah.
it's like I look at this way, it's an oppression. Okay, I got to be careful. Or I could see this as a protection.
Yeah.
If nobody steals, my own goods are safe. You know, you shall not, lust your neighbor's wife. Then my marriage is safe.
Yeah.
So it's always a question of motivation. I think people don't see the character of God. And then by seeing this, they don't understand what's behind it. God is only interested. Like God is this cosmic cop. You know, he kills the fun. That's what he wants to do. Every time there's fun somewhere, he comes in and he kills it. Not at all. What he wants is has to have joy. And what we're trying to do is find happiness in things without God. And it doesn't work. So we try to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And then you go back to what Romans 1 when he said earlier, God leaves us alone in this. Okay, you want this, you can have it. You know.
Yeah.
So yeah.
There's a proverb I think is relevant. Proverbs 14, verse 12. It says, "There is a way which seems right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death."
Yes.
So this is just kind of man's MO. Like, okay, I think this is right. This is the way I'm gonna go. I don't foresee the consequences maybe that are down the road. Oh, I'm hungry. I'm gonna go steal this. Oh, I need something that my neighbor has, or I really desire it, so I'm gonna go take it from them. Or you're like Cain. You get so mad and you commit a heinous crime. Like you don't see the end result, but the end result. What are the wages of sin? The wages of sin is death in Romans chapter 6, verse 23. All this to say is that there's also a way that God says, or there's a way that God lays out for us. There's a way that God gives us, and it's found here in our Bibles. And it's for us to grow in and understand and hear a lot of and start to receive, so that we can not be caught up in our own ways.
Yes.
I think it's a matter of humility in a sense, where the world and life does not revolve around us. We are just one speck on a planet that is a speck in the universe, or in the galaxy, which our galaxy is a speck in the entire universe. Like it's just a matter of reorienting ourselves to who this God character is, and what and I love what you said, what his motives really are in speaking to us.
Yeah. What I mean, you said the point is like in the Proverbs is the end of the matter in one way. Like the end of this is death. Like if I take my own way. So if I look at this and I can say, well, yeah, I'm free to do whatever I want. Look at the world the way it is today. Like in a way, like okay, so I'm not interested in politics as much as other people maybe are in the one way, but look at our political decisions or our policy decisions, right? With alcohol, with drugs and all these things. And we have these things like, it's interesting to me how we have plagues, in our societies that are based on ideas that we need to relieve people from this oppression of the law. Like we're going to legalize this, legalize that, and the end is death. Like in our modern society is that we have the more freedom and we have the more pain as well. And that's the one thing that goes back to, okay, maybe I could look at this and say God was right. Like there is a few, like I met this, I think I've said it a few times, maybe in other venues, but when I was in Bible college years ago, I was 18 or 19 years old, and I go down to, I used to live in the city in the southern France, called Nîmes, and we go down every Saturday. We go out on outreach and talk to people. And it's Saturday night, maybe I don't know, 5 or 6 at night, maybe later, I don't remember. But I meet this group of young people, my age, and I see them and I go to them. I see maybe 10, 12 guys. And hey guys, and then the response was interesting because they're saying, well, like one of the guys was interested in talking, the others were just listening, but he basically said, well, it's like I see what you're saying, but I want to be free to live the way I want.
Yeah.
So I said, well, that's interesting. And he said, well, for example, we're going to a nightclub tonight, we're just gonna have party all night, and then you cannot do that as a Christian. And I thought for a moment, I said, well, can I do that as a Christian? And I said, well, I'm going to tell you something shocking. I could.
Right. Yeah.
And I would not lose my salvation.
Yeah.
But there's a difference here is that two things. Number one is you're not free not to go. And I showed him by saying, okay, let me ask you a question. Let's say you cancel your evening tonight. You go back home, you help your mom clean up the house, and tidy your room, everything. And Monday morning, you say, well, I'm going to look like an idiot. And I said, that's the point.
Right.
You go and do those things for two reasons. You're trying to find happiness, and you don't find it with alcohol or fun in the way you think. Number two, you're doing this because out of coercions. People make you do this.
Yeah.
But the other thing is this. Let me tell you what freedom really is. Freedom is not doing what I want. Freedom is even deeper than that. Freedom is not doing what I would want to do.
Nice.
Ask anybody who's married. They'll tell you the sacrifices, compromises are a big part. But the motivation is love. It's like I'm not losing anything.
Right.
I'm gaining something.
Yeah.
And that's the point. Is like you think you're free to do whatever you want. I'm free not to do what I would want. And that's the greater freedom. And it goes back to what we're saying about God. Like God's character is saying, yes, you're looking for happiness. I made you to look for happiness.
Yeah.
But you will find happiness here. And if you don't find it, which is in me,
Right.
God says, and if you don't find it here, you'll have to find it somewhere else. Hence the idea of, okay, I'm going to try a little alcohol. It doesn't work. Legalize it. I'm going to try a little drug. It doesn't work. Legalize it. And then I'm trying to open the doors more and more.
Yeah.
And of course, people want to have this freedom because we go back in Genesis 3. I want to be autonomous. I reject God. I know the truth. I suppress it. But I still want to find what God designed me to find. And I find it on my own.
Nice.
And that's my trouble.
Wow.
Yes.
That was jam-packed right there.
Okay,
ladies
do you want to
and gentlemen.
unpack it?
If you were listening, that was jam-packed. No, I'm not going to add a word
If
to
not,
that.
if you're not listening, then
That was great. Hey, it's a good time to say if you are following along today,
Yes.
we are on Facebook Live and YouTube Live. If you are listening right now between the time of 11 a.m. and roughly 11:45 a.m., you can write in your comments. We will see them. For instance, we have David Norwood making a few funny but relevant comments. Go to any restaurant and start eating a stranger's food and see how fast morals arise.
Yep.
Also, he says, grab a baby from a mom's arms and see how soon
don't.
ethics arise. What's that?
don't.
Yep. Please don't do those things. But to prove his point, like as
Yes.
soon as you do something like that, there is an unwritten code built into all of
Yes.
us that says, hey, that's wrong. Don't even go there. Brian also writes in, he quotes a verse for us, I am the Lord thy God. You shall have no other gods before me. Exodus 20, verse 3. He's referencing God's objective truth versus good, evil, and ethics. Sometimes the gods that we put above God himself. Sometimes the creations that man uses his intellect to create these structures and these parameters to live by that again disclude God.
Yeah, I mean, to go back to the idea of David's, like funny comments in one way, I remember having this conversation with someone. It's easy for people to say, well, there is no objective truth, whatever, or in morals. And I did ask the question one day, what if I would slap you right now on the face? What would you do? Mm-hmm. Well, I would call this assault, and I would call the cops. But what if it's my preference?
Yeah,
that's what I like to do. I like to slap people.
Yeah.
Well, it's wrong. Well, you just said there is no objective truth and no objective right or wrong. So how would you see that? And I think it helps people realize, okay, well, because I don't think we need to be argumentative or we need to be like aggressive about it. I think we need to find ways to help people realize, okay, what you're saying is not consistent with what you're actually thinking yourself.
Right.
So, and then it ended up being a good conversation and realized, yes, I guess you're right. I guess maybe I do believe my morals are objective because I want to be respected. And then he went on, oh, maybe respect is the way. Well, on what ground? What if I don't respect people, right? What if I decide that I'm going to respect myself of other people? It means that if I have to take somebody else's stuff or somebody else's life, I will.
Yeah.
That would be respecting for myself.
Yeah.
In a way, like why can it be as because people say, well, heroism is amazing or altruism is amazing. All these things. Well, that's your preference. My preference is I'm the center of the universe. I want to do everything for myself.
Right.
Well, that's bad.
Yeah.
On what ground? That's the point. So here we are without God, try to battle to find, a way to live with others, live with ourselves.
Yeah.
And with others, and we can't. If there's no God, there's absolutely nothing.
Right. And you have extreme examples that are starting to surface these days. So we have gender ideology, which is something that is just throwing, I don't know, a monkey wrench into everything. Now there's more than two genders. Now there's all these other things based on our feelings and based how we perceive ourselves to be that we need everyone else to agree with us on.
Yeah.
There's also, this is a even sicker example. You have pedophilia becoming more and more talked about in a way that they're trying to accept it.
Yes.
They're starting to use this term, minor attracted persons.
Yeah, it's
and
MAP.
they're getting rid of like the stigma of this word pedophilia.
No, you shouldn't.
But you can't get rid of that stigma. That's just like plain evil. Something like that is just plain evil whenever you go after a child. And the same thing is happening with gender ideology. You're going after children.
Yeah.
You're telling them that they can make the decisions. You're telling an adult that they can like influence these children if they have no real part in their lives. They're not connected to them. They're not their parents. They're just people who have a professional opinion and they need to follow them.
Yeah.
It becomes evil. It becomes everyone's doing what's right in their own eyes.
Yes.
And they're just tail spinning. Society tail spins.
Which leads us like the idea, like we look at you know, when you ask in philosophy or ethics, you wonder, why do people have these agendas? Let's put it this way. And then you find a few reasons, and you have what we call a prior commitments or maybe presuppositions.
Yeah.
And there's a few things maybe we can read. There's three major ones that people are going to be using against, you know, our worldview as Christians. Number one is materialism. We believe there is nothing but matter and energy. There's no God. There's nothing. The other one is evolution, of course.
Yeah.
And the third one is hedonism.
Yeah.
So since your accent is better than mine, you want to read the first one?
Sure. Materialism.
Yeah. It's
Okay.
fun.
Materialism, we have written here, prior commitment, presupposition. Our willingness to accept scientific claims that are against common sense is the key to an understanding of the real struggle between science and the supernatural. We take the side of science in spite of the patent absurdity of some of its constructs, in spite of its failure to fulfill many of its extravagant promises of health and life, in spite of the tolerance of the scientific community for unsubstantiated just so stories, because we have a prior commitment, a commitment to materialism. Do you want me to keep going?
Yeah, I mean, it's up to you. You want to say something about it?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you don't want to finish it, then we can say something about it. There's a lot to say there.
I'll read it.
I think the last sentence is the one I like a lot.
Okay, I'm skipping right down to the end.
You
then.
don't
Here
like
we
it's
go.
too long. Okay.
Wait, that might be the last. It is the last sentence.
It's very long.
It's that whole part.
Richard Lewontin is a very interesting dude.
Okay, it is not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept a material explanation of the phenomenal world, but on the contrary, that we are forced by our prior adherence to material causes to create an apparatus of investigation and a set of concepts that produce material explanations, no matter how counterintuitive, no matter how mystifying to the uninitiated. Moreover, that materialism is absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door.
Yeah. So if I summarize this in a way, so basically he says that his materialism is a commitment, right? I decided that there wouldn't be a God. So my opposition to Christian ethics, which is I reject the idea that God could be capable of deciding what is right and what is wrong, is because I'm already committed to the idea that there is no God. And what's amazing here is that he's actually saying that science sometimes does not make any sense. Sometimes even science is counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Right? And even if some of the constructs are unacceptable, we have to stick with it, because if we do, and then we're fine. If we don't, we leave a divine foot in the door. And that's what's amazing about it. And this is very interesting because Richard Lewontin, that's an article. So Carl Sagan, a very famous atheist scientist, which I have a lot of respect for, wrote a book, it's called The Demon Hunted World. And Richard Lewontin, who's also a scientist, writes a review about it. And explains why we have to reject the idea of Christianity, reject the idea of God, because if we do, then we're in trouble, because even if science does not make any sense, we have to stick with it. And I think this is one of those commitments that puts us in a place where, like, in this world today, like, we have signs, like, I don't know if you have signs in your neighborhood, but back in the height of pandemic and racial tensions in the country, maybe a couple of years ago, you would find those signs, the science is real, love is love, and all these things.
Yeah.
So I get it. The idea of love is love, I get that. But the idea of science is science, to me, is the most troubling of all. It's not the most troubling of all for people, but for me it was. What the heck are you talking about? It's because the idea is that we have to stick with it, because if we don't, our world would crumble. And if my world crumbles, I have to go turn back to God. And that's the what's amazing about the last sentence. Like, the material is absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. If I'm not careful in rejecting anything that is above materialism, I find myself with God, and we don't want that. So who decides what is right and what is wrong? I have to reject God, therefore I have to go with something that may be counterintuitive, but I'll stick with it.
Yeah. if you think about science over the, a longer period of history, science is always changing. That's kind of the whole purpose of studying science. What's the word? You create a hypothesis. You go through the scientific method. You create a hypothesis. You perform an experiment, and you record your results. Whatever your results are, you have to record them, and then you draw a conclusion based on those results. Let's say your hypothesis is nowhere close to what your results dictate. Then you start the process over again, and you start with a new hypothesis. So science, over the longer course of time, is always changing. How many things have we gotten wrong over the hundreds of years, centuries that we've been alive, millennia that we've been alive? How many things have we gotten wrong? If science becomes your God, science becomes your number one objective truth, then how is that possible? To me, that's like Matthew chapter 7, where Jesus says, "Those who hear my words and don't do them, you're building your house on like a foundation of sand. Like the sand is always shifting. The weather comes in and moves it around and destroys it. Eventually the house falls down. If you're building your house on something that itself is changeable, movable, always being altered, then you don't have any solid ground to stand on. You don't have a real basis for right and wrong, because that's always changing. We talked about that yesterday too. Like slavery in different periods of history, it was right in some, like in the Hammurabi Code, slavery was right. It was encoded into the Hammurabi Code. Now we're in society today. Everyone, hates slavery, and of course that's right in what we understand, even in God's mind. Like that's right. We don't agree with slavery, but it's changed over the course of time. It goes back and forth in some senses.
Yeah, and I say sometimes to people, they look back in history and they reflect and say, "Wow, back in the day," or they even cancel their own parents.
Yeah,
and I said that to some young people. You can cancel all you want, but you know what's going to happen? Your kids will cancel you because you didn't go far enough. And they look at me, "What are you talking about? We're looking back and we're making right all the wrongs of the past."
Yeah.
No, you won't be doing it far enough.
Yeah.
You don't go far enough. Because of course we're looking at when there was statues that were taken down in the country, regardless of where you stand on the topic, I don't think it's relevant. But I think in a way, like in the generation from that people, well, those statues needs to go as well.
Yeah.
Because this guy sneezed during the pandemic 3 times. It's recorded and it should be removed.
Gosh.
So like, do we go far enough? We'll never go far enough. But the funniest thing is that we're under pressure to correct the past with no objective authority and value. So we're claiming that there's no objective truth, and we're still correcting the errors of the past.
Yeah.
This does not make any sense.
Well, this kind of feeds into our next prior commitment. This feeds into the idea that our thinking evolves, that our understanding evolves, and you have this this presupposition of evolution.
Yes.
And it reads, who's this quote by? This is
which one? The first one?
Yeah.
It's Lucia Hall.
Lucia Hall. Okay, so evolution. Traditional religious belief has assumed that a deity was both the source and enforcer of the only possible right ethical system.
Yes.
As secular humanists, however, we need to discover a naturalistic explanation for the ethical impulse. Since the source of this impulse cannot be found in reason, we need to look to an irrational emotional response that has evolved as part of the human species.
Yeah. Well, so she's not a Christian, she's a humanist. But what she's saying basically is that those ethical impulses are there.
Yeah.
Where did they come from? So you say we don't know where it comes from. Can it be reason? Otherwise, we would be able to have an absolute truth.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, what is the advantage, the evolutionary advantage of ethical impulse? They are not capable of answering the question. And they will say, well, if we don't behave properly, we won't survive. Well, I don't think so, because every millions of species around the world that eat other species, they still survive.
Yes.
And whoever species is eaten still survives. There are hundreds and thousands of lions that eat antelopes. There are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of antelopes still there. So we don't need to be nice to other species. Right? They're still thriving. So it doesn't work. So if you go a little further, maybe I can read it with a French accent.
Oh, go for it.
Yeah. Okay, so it's another quote. But still in the same idea. Struggle for existence is the basic characteristic of the entire biological world, meaning that the survival of the fittest, right? So in the course of that struggle, different biological species have developed marvelous adaptation, which serves for the primary purpose of survival. So what it's going to sell to you is the idea that we're there and we have ethical, advantage. It's an advantage to have ethics because you survive better. It
Yeah.
is not surprising that in the animal world, such adaptation are mental as well as physical, slowly building to this the idea. In the long history of biological evolution, the ancestors of Homo sapiens, which is us, according to and the Homo sapiens himself, which is us again, must have developed appropriate adaptive mental attributes. Man's will, as well as man's reason, are thus a product of biological evolution. They are telling you we needed it, therefore we got it, which to me raises two important questions. Number one is, who knew we needed it?
Right.
Since evolution is not a person.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. And since there is nobody behind it, how do we succeed in getting it?
Right.
And there is no answer for that.
No, there's no answer. I once was on a plane ride and sitting next to a woman. Her name was Nine. I'm not making that up. Her name was the number 9.
Okay.
And we had a really great conversation, and we talked about like these presuppositions.
Yes.
And we got on the subject of evolution, and I asked her, and this was maybe I don't know, a year or two before it was very like just the common message of society today. Being I don't even know what all the letters are, LGBTQ plus. I don't know what they all are. Where that's just generally accepted, widely accepted. It's just very common. I asked her, like, from an evolutionary standpoint, which is what you're claiming that you have, how does humanity becoming same-sex oriented help us to survive in the long run? Because in the long run, if everyone's trending towards that way and we become just a same-sex attracted species, like, would we not force ourselves into some sort of
Extension.
population decline or like crisis? And of course you could maybe answer that with, well, science is getting to the point where we can create life, where we can create what is needed, and you see it in some ways when people carry another child's baby, something like that. But in the long run, does that add up with the evolutionary characteristic that we're all, survival of the fittest? I don't know.
Doesn't.
No, it doesn't.
No, it clearly doesn't.
But you don't get an answer from someone whenever you talk to them about it. So it's just hard whenever you are coming from two different playing fields. Whenever someone is saying, well, I am going to determine what's right and wrong, and someone else says, well, you know what, I have to submit to authority that's outside myself. I have to go with the being that created me, and know that, like, he has put eternity into our hearts, Ecclesiastes 3:11, and that if I want to have an understanding of his life for me, then I have to, like, find his eternal nature, and I have to like receive that.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to finish. Like, maybe, I don't know, there's other things we could say, but I think it's a good way to finish. We answered the question in one way. We said at the beginning, yes, who decides what is wrong? What is wrong? We answered God.
Right.
And our answer after 45 minutes of talking, it's still the same.
Still the same
but
thing.
We just proved it.
Yeah.
That's the difference. So how do we summarize that? Very simple. I think number one is the reason why we are raising the question is because we gained autonomy from God in Genesis 3. We fell and we decided that we're going to decide for ourselves.
Yes.
Now we find in a place where we had to deny any form of objectivity, otherwise we cannot do whatever we want. And it puts into a place where actually we cannot live this way, because when we're living a certain way, we feel guilty about it. We only impose that on other people, so it becomes objective again without the authority. So you find yourself in a conundrum here. If you believe in God, you're fine, because you can explain why there is objectivity in ethics, and then you can decide why God decides what is right and what is wrong. And we also discussed his motivation. Without God, you find yourself in a place where you don't have that objectivity, but you still want it because you would like to impose your view on other people.
Yes.
And that is completely irrational.
Right.
So there's your answer.
Yeah, and that's what the devil says way back with Eve. Like, you will be as gods. You will be as gods. You will be the ones making those determinations.
Yeah. So in a way, like we said yesterday, like, how do we define right and wrong? Well, it's very simple. The moment we have the revelation of God, that's what we believe. That God exists, we believe in his revelation, which is the word of God.
Yeah.
So it takes us to theology. We define what is, what the Bible says. We organize it as your systematic theology. From there, you draw your ethics. I don't decide my way of developing morals on my own. I submit this to my theology, and then what is right, what is wrong is clearly laid out for me, and then I live accordingly. And then I have a choice. I obey or I disobey.
Yeah.
And then there is obedience, there is a blessing with disobedience, there is maybe chastisement if you're like a Christian, and then there is a redemption. And if you're not saved, then that's what you need. I think one of the main things we need to say about this, like if you're not a believer and you hear about this, you might hear and start wonder, okay, yes, maybe they're right, or maybe you don't agree. But if you do, as that's what you need. You don't need to change your behavior. You need to find Christ, and once you find Christ, your behavior will change, and your view of the world will change as well.
Yeah. Amen.
Amen.
Yeah, I think that's it today. Thank you guys so much for following along. We did have a few more comments come in. We appreciate you guys writing in, Areta and David. Thank you for participating in today's broadcast. We sincerely appreciate it. We're going to be, Philippe and I are finally done for this week. You went through 2 episodes with us. Congratulations.
Sorry about that.
You made it to the other side. Please don't forget to subscribe to the show on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and more. Please be sure to join us for our next show coming up this week, more on Christian ethics. Have a great day.